In August 2021, Chinese archaeologists once again entered the royal cemetery area of the Shang kings at Yinxu in Anyang, Henan, to conduct large-scale surveys. They originally hoped to locate the main road that connected the Shang palace area with the royal tombs over 3,000 years ago, and to further clarify the boundaries and layout of the entire cemetery. Unexpectedly, they identified more than 460 new sacrificial pits underground. Together with remains discovered over the previous 90-plus years, the known sacrificial pits in this royal cemetery now number over 2,800, and the actual total may even exceed 3,000. Some of these pits contain cattle, horses, dogs, and other animals. Others contain human beings. There are rows of skeletons, severed heads, and corpses subjected to different forms of treatment. This was not a mass grave hurriedly dug after a battle. It was part of the Shang Royal Cemetery, a carefully planned space for human sacrifice, used repeatedly by the royal house over a long period. This discovery once again reveals a fact long marginalized in China's public historical narrative. The Shang Dynasty was a highly developed Bronze Age civilization with a mature writing system, complex rituals, and strong political organization. But it also practiced large-scale, systematic killing of living people as sacrificial offerings. In this respect, the Shang evokes another famous pre-modern empire. When the Spanish entered the Valley of Mexico in the 16th century, they recorded how the Aztecs placed war captives on altars, offering their blood to nourish the gods and sustain the cosmic order. Early colonial sources claimed that the Aztecs sacrificed tens of thousands of people each year, figures that were very likely exaggerated. However, later discoveries of tzompantli, skull rack remains, sacrificial stones, and structures built from human skulls have proved that large-scale human sacrifice did indeed take place. Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History has confirmed that the tzompantli near the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan once displayed the skulls of a great many sacrificial victims. Unlike the Aztecs, the Shang recorded the purpose and process of their human sacrifices in oracle bone inscriptions. Should 10 or 30 people be killed this time? Should they be beheaded, burned, or sunk in water? Could these offerings bring rain, a good harvest, or victory in war? The questions were divined by applying heat to bones and then carved onto their surfaces. Among these records, one of the most frequently mentioned victims is called Qiang. The oracle bone texts repeatedly speak of capturing Qiang, using Qiang, and beheading Qiang. The army took Qiang captives. The royal house decided to use them, and at the sacrifices, some were decapitated. As early as 1974, a Chinese historian estimated from the oracle bones that at least 14,000 people were used in human sacrifices during the late Shang period. Among them, over 7,000 were explicitly identified as Qiang. This estimate does not represent all the Shang human sacrifices, because large numbers of oracle bones have been destroyed, and many sacrificial events were never recorded in writing. But it is enough to show that the Qiang were not just a few enemies caught by chance. They were the main group of foreign victims on the Shang kings' altars. The Qiang in the oracle bone inscriptions are not the same as the Qiang ethnic group in contemporary China. They are more accurately termed the ancient Qiang. They lived in northwestern China, and their most important homeland lay on the northeastern fringes of what is today called the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau. Yes, they are one of the most important ancestors of today's Tibetans. Sadly, their first large-scale entry into recorded Chinese history took this form. The character Qiang, from the oracle bones of over 3 millennia ago down to today, has kept largely the same form: a sheep on top and a human below. It may have started as nothing more than a label the Shang used for sheep-herding peoples to their west. Yet an even grimmer reality emerges from the oracle bones. Shang captives are often listed alongside cattle and sheep, with their numbers tallied, selected, and executed. Within the Shang sacrificial system, they may have been seen not only as enemies, but also as a kind of offering that could be captured, counted, and presented to the spirits, much like livestock. These ancient Qiang mainly lived in present-day Gansu, Qinghai, and the northeastern margins of the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau. They planted millet and wheat in river valleys and herded sheep, cattle, and horses on the grasslands and mountain slopes. In fact, the term encompassed many tribes to China's west. They had no unified king, nor were they a state with clearly defined borders. In the 13th century BC, the Shang king Wu Ding launched a large-scale military campaign to the west and placed the army under his consort, Fu Hao. The oracle bones record that the forces commanded by Fu Hao may have numbered as many as 13,000, one of the largest known Shang conscription records, and their target was precisely the Qiang Fang, the Qiang polity. The course of the war has been lost, but the outcome can be imagined. Shang troops pushed deep into the west, seizing livestock and people, and marched the captives back. For the Shang dynasty, this was a victory. For many Qiang, the journey's end may well have been the sacrificial pits beside the royal tombs. When the Shang fell, the situation was reversed. The Zhou people from the west allied with various groups to overthrow the Shang, and some Qiang groups joined the Zhou coalition. The Zhou royal house also intermarried for a long time with Qiang nobles of the Qiang lineage. It is said that the famous Grand Duke Zhang Ziya was himself descended from the Qiang. After that, the Qin state steadily expanded westward. Some tribes close to Qin submitted, others were conquered, and still more migrated west and south. The Book of the Later Han records a Qiang man named Wu Yi Yuanjian. Captured and enslaved by the Qin, he escaped and made his way to the upper reaches of the Yellow River, where he gathered followers, and his descendants split into many tribes. This story encapsulates the recurring fate of the Qiang in history: captured, fleeing, migrating, and then starting over in new valleys and grasslands. From the Shang through the Zhou, Qin, and Han, the Qiang on the whole were subjected to pressure from the Central Plains civilization. Some Qiang moved east and gradually merged into the population of the Central Plains. Some went south into western Sichuan, and many more moved along the upper Yellow River by Qinghai Lake and along the eastern rim of the plateau into the interior of the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau. There they intermarried and mixed over a long period with people already living on the highlands, becoming one of the major ancestral sources of the later Tibetans and other Tibeto-Burman-speaking groups. During the Qin and Han periods, the Central Plains dynasties lumped the numerous tribes of the upper Yellow River together under the label Western Qiang. Groups such as the Shen Lian, Shaodang, and Shen Lang each had their own chieftains and grazing grounds. Sometimes they fought each other, sometimes they united to resist Han armies, and sometimes their members took up service in Han frontier commanderies. They never built a unified empire like the Xiongnu, but for that very reason, they could not be conquered in a single stroke. When one tribe surrendered, another could simply withdraw into the mountains. When one group was relocated, a new tribe would occupy the pastures. The later Eastern Han Dynasty would face exactly this kind of opponent: leaderless, constantly on the move, and impossible to annihilate completely. After the founding of the Western Han, the most dangerous enemy in the north had always been the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu Chanyu could muster large numbers of cavalry and strike south from the Mongolian steppe against the frontier commanderies. In contrast, the Qiang tribes were scattered across highlands, valleys, and rivers, smaller in scale and rarely able to coordinate actions over the long term. The Han strategy was therefore directed primarily northwards. At the same time, however, the Xiongnu always showed a tendency to ally with the Qiang. When Emperor Wu of Han seized the He corridor and established commanderies, counties, and military outposts there, he, in a sense, severed the link between the Xiongnu and the Qiang. This move protected the routes into Central Asia, but it also pushed Han farmland, walled towns, and officials right up against Qiang grazing lands. Conflict soon flared. In the late Western Han, the Qiang began to mount offensives against Han settlements. The Han court dispatched a 76-year-old veteran general, Chao Chongguo, to lead the campaign against the Qiang. He did not seek a decisive battle immediately. Instead, he established military agricultural colonies, built strongpoints, cuffed the Qiang supply routes, and waited for the tribal confederation to disintegrate on its own. The war ended in this kind of intelligent war of attrition, but the Han did not eliminate the underlying tensions. They merely imposed a loose hold over the region through the dependent states system of indirect rule. A fragile order took shape on the frontier. The Han occupied the walled cities and farmland, the Qiang retained some of their pasture lands, and the two sides maintained relations through chieftains, officials, and markets. The moment the central government weakened, this order would instantly collapse. At the beginning of the 1st century AD, Wang Mang seized the Han throne, and the realm soon erupted into war. Armies in the north and the central plains were preoccupied with fighting for the capital, leaving the northwestern garrisons without reinforcements. Many Qiang re-entered frontier commanderies such as Yinxu. After Wang Mang's regime collapsed, the Longxi Emperor, the Red Eyebrows, and regional warlords continued to fight each other. The Qiang seized the opportunity to attack Han settlements, and some Qiang tribes were even recruited by local warlords to fight against the newly established Eastern Han. By the time Emperor Guangwu, Liu Shu, had largely reunified the central plains, the administrative system in the northwest lay in ruins. Han settlers, Qiang tribes, local strongmen, and scattered soldiers were all mixed together. In AD 33, seeing the light of victory in the unification wars, the Han Empire began to find the bandwidth to deal with the Western Qiang. They re-established the post of Colonel Protector of the Qiang, an office specifically responsible for Qiang affairs. But before the Han could make any real headway, the next year the powerful Xianlian Qiang united with other tribes and once again attacked key Han towns. Han forces defeated them in battle, but the Qiang did not withdraw entirely. In the summer of AD 35, they attacked Lintao. This city commanded the road from the Guangdong region into the northwestern mountains. Its loss would threaten a vast expanse of Han territory. At the time, large numbers of Eastern Han troops were still mopping up regional warlords, so the court could not commit unlimited forces to the northwest. The commander at the front reported to Liu Shu that Longxi had been severely ravaged, and that restoring order required sending someone who knew the local roads, tribes, and military conditions intimately. That man was named Ma Yuan. When Ma Yuan arrived in the northwest, he was already close to 50 years old. He came from a family of officials, but in some ways this was not a family history to boast about. His lineage could be traced back to Zhao Shi, a famous general of the state of Zhao during the Warring States period. But his great-grandfather and 3 great-uncles had conspired to assassinate Emperor Wu of Han and were ultimately executed. As a result, the Ma family later produced no high-ranking dignitaries. Ma Yuan's grandfather had been no more than a gentleman attendant, and his father was merely the gate officer at the northern entrance of the Huiyang Palace. As for Ma Yuan himself, in his youth he was once tasked with escorting a prisoner convicted of a serious crime. Along the way, he took pity on the prisoner and privately released him, then fled to the northern frontier. For many years after that, he raised livestock in the Longxi and Beidi regions, owning flocks of cattle and sheep and becoming intimately familiar with the local roads, climate, and people. When the realm fell into chaos, he had contact with various regional warlords before finally pledging his allegiance to Liu Shu. During Liu Shu's offensive in the northwest, Ma Yuan used grains of rice to construct a model of the mountains, valleys, and roads in front of the emperor, explaining point by point where the army should advance. Liu Shu followed his advice and quickly broke through the enemy defenses. By the time Lin Tao was in crisis, the commander at the front recommended Ma Yuan to the emperor not because his name was the most renowned, but because he truly understood what the army would face once it entered the northwest. In the summer of AD 35, Liu Shu appointed Ma Yuan as Grand Administrator of Longxi. Upon his arrival, Ma Yuan immediately mustered 3,000 infantry and cavalry and marched on Lin Tao. Rather than wait for the various Qiang groups to assemble, he struck first at the Xianlian Qiang, who had already advanced close to the city. The Han troops killed several hundred and captured over 10,000 horses, cattle, and sheep. Livestock were the foundation of Qiang mobility, warfare, and subsistence. Losing animals was even harder to recover from than simply losing warriors. Seeing the Xianlian defeated, other Qiang near the frontier, more than 8,000 people, promptly surrendered to Ma Yuan. After this first attack, the immediate crisis at Lin Tao was lifted. But the main Xianlian force had not been destroyed. Tens of thousands of them, together with their families and supplies, withdrew into a strategically difficult river valley and continued to plunder along the key route leading into eastern Qinghai. Ma Yuan and another Han force pursued them together, and the Qiang moved their wives, children, and wagons deeper into the valley. A frontal assault would force the Han troops to attack uphill along narrow paths and would quickly exhaust their provisions. Instead of advancing along the main route, Ma Yuan led his men stealthily along a side path and suddenly approached the Qiang camp. The Qiang pulled back further to Tangyi Valley and concentrated their best troops on the northern mountain. Ma Yuan deployed his main force at the foot of the mountain to draw their attention, while dispatching several hundred cavalry to circle around to the rear. At night, the flanking force set fires, and the Han troops below beat their drums and shouted. Thinking their retreat had been cut off by a large army, the Qiang began to collapse. The Han pursued, killing over 1,000 and capturing grain and livestock. Ma Yuan, lacking sufficient troops, did not press deeper into the highlands. During the battle, an arrow pierced his calf, yet he still led his troops back to Longxi. This series of engagements scattered the Xianlian assembly, but immediately raised a more difficult question. Some at court advocated abandoning the regions too far west. The roads were too long, the enemy too numerous, and the cost of transporting soldiers and grain far exceeded any tax revenue the area could provide. Ma Yuan opposed this. He explained to Liu Shu that most of the cities there were still solid and could serve as strongholds. The river valley lands were fertile, and irrigation channels could be restored. If the Han army withdrew voluntarily, the Qiang would retake these well-watered and productive lands and use them as a base from which to repeatedly attack Han territory. Abandoning those cities might seem to reduce expenditure, but in reality, it would be handing attack bases to the enemy. Liu Shu accepted his advice, and the Han forces did not pull back. Ma Yuan then appointed officials, repaired city walls and small fortifications, dredged irrigation canals, and recruited refugees to return and farm the land. For the Qiang who had already surrendered, Ma Yuan adopted a different approach. He relocated more than 8,000 of them to 3 commanderies further in the interior, separating them from their original tribes and pasture lands, and dispersing them among the population. The Han hoped to break up the tribal confederation by relocation, depriving Qiang chieftains of the ability to summon thousands of warriors at once. For the Han, this was a cheaper means of control than maintaining a long-term garrison. For the relocated, however, it meant having to leave familiar valleys and rebuild their lives among Han officials and settlers. 2 years later, the Shenlang Qiang, who had been moved to the Wudu region, joined with tribes outside the frontier and killed Han officials. Ma Yuan led over 4,000 troops to suppress them. The Qiang occupied the high ground, hoping the Han would attack uphill, but Ma Yuan deployed his forces in a more advantageous position, first seizing water sources and pastures, and refused to offer battle. Without water and grass, livestock could not survive, and the tribes could not remain for long. Some chieftains fled beyond the frontier with their followers, while over 10,000 who stayed behind eventually surrendered. Ma Yuan had ended this rebellion with the least possible direct fighting, and the situation temporarily returned to calm. For several more years, Ma Yuan remained in Longxi, repairing city walls, digging irrigation channels, reviving agriculture, and reconfirming the status of allied chieftains. He simultaneously employed warfare, relocation, and local governance, striking quickly at tribes that were assembling, dispersing and resettling those that had been defeated, and restoring production in the river valleys that had to be held. This set of policies did manage to preserve over a decade of relative stability, and it made Ma Yuan one of the most trusted frontier commanders of the Eastern Han. But the problem did not truly disappear. Once moved inside the Han frontier, the Qiang had, on the surface, left the border zone. But in reality, they were now situated along the routes leading to the imperial capital. If local officials handled disputes fairly, these people could become farmers, herders, and soldiers. The moment officials seized their land, withheld their pay, or forced them into labor, they could rise up in the very heart of Han territory. Ma Yuan had resolved the immediate military crisis, but he had also shifted some of the future conflicts from the frontier into the interior of the empire. 28 years after Ma Yuan's death, in AD 77, large-scale warfare broke out again between Han forces and the Western Qiang. After that, the conflict stopped and then erupted again repeatedly. The first prolonged war lasted from AD 77 to 101, the second from 107 to 118. Then there were wars from 139 to 145, from 159 to 169, and at the very end of the Eastern Han, the Liang Province conflicts, beginning in AD 184. Not all Qiang fought against the Han all the time, and the entire northwest was not continuously ablaze for 200 years. But nearly every generation of Eastern Han emperors had to confront the same problem again: the Qiang rebellions. The most dangerous outbreak began in AD 107. This great Qiang uprising, triggered by conscription, was once again launched by the powerful Xianlian Qiang, who united with other tribes, cut the roads, and attacked commanderies and counties. The Book of the Later Han records that some of the rebels, just rising in arms, lacked proper weapons and had to use bamboo poles and wooden branches as spears, wooden boards as shields, and some even held up bronze mirrors to make them look like weapons. Yet in the face of these poorly equipped forces, the Eastern Han's local administrative and military systems rapidly fell apart. The court dispatched an army of 50,000 into the northwest, but it suffered a disastrous defeat, losing over 8,000 men. In the aftermath, the Xianlian chieftain even declared himself Son of Heaven in Beidi Commandery, summoned Qiang tribes from far and wide, and launched attacks eastwards and southwards, repeatedly raiding the three adjuncts region around Chang'an. The roads linking Guangzhou with the northwest were severed. Grain prices in some county seats soared to 10,000 cash per shi, and the people died or fled in great numbers. This was no longer small-scale raiding along the frontier. The war was eventually suppressed around AD 118, but at an enormous cost. A later Eastern Han general, reviewing the campaigns in a memorial, noted that the 14 years of continuous Qiang warfare under Emperor An had cost roughly 24 billion cash. Another 7-year war under Emperor Shun cost over 8 billion, and military operations under Emperor Huan cost another 4.4 billion. What the court had poured in was not merely temporary military spending for a frontier commandery, but decades of fiscal revenue, grain transport, and corvée labor. Frontier farmers had to pay taxes while also bearing the burden of transport. Areas through which armies passed had to provide livestock, shelter, and fodder. Even when Han forces ultimately prevailed, the hollowed-out villages could not recover overnight. It was this same general who chose a path completely different from Ma Yuan's policy of conciliation. No longer content to simply force the tribes to surrender, he pursued them relentlessly, aiming to annihilate the resistance groups entirely. Over the course of several years, he led his troops in over 100 engagements, killing tens of thousands and capturing hundreds of thousands of livestock. Militarily, this did grievous damage to the main strength of the Eastern Qiang. Financially, however, it emptied the imperial treasury. More importantly, mass killing could not rebuild the shattered frontier order. Survivors withdrew deeper into the mountains. Those who surrendered continued to be relocated inland, and Han farmers left the northwest because of the wars. The empire gained a depopulated frontier, but not stability. By AD 184, the Yellow Turban Rebellion erupted in the Central Plains, and a new rebellion also broke out in Liang Province. Qiang tribesmen, Han frontier soldiers, local strongmen, and troops that had slipped beyond central control all made alliances with one another. The old ethnic boundaries were scrambled by decades of war. To suppress these uprisings, the court had to delegate ever more power to regional commanders. These men commanded their own troops, controlled their own food supplies, and held their own bases. They would later become major players in the warlord struggles at the end of the Eastern Han. Among the notable commanders who led Qiang and northwestern border forces was a famous figure of the Three Kingdoms period, Ma Yuan. And his direct ancestor was none other than Ma Yuan. The Qiang rebellions were not the sole cause of the Eastern Han's fall. The struggles between eunuchs and imperial in-laws, land concentration, fiscal crises, and nationwide uprisings were equally important. But the Northwestern Wars consumed military expenditure year after year, forced population movements, and made the central government ever more dependent on regional armed forces. They did not destroy the Eastern Han in a single campaign, but over more than a century, they eroded the empire's capacity to handle its other crises. During the very centuries when the Eastern Han was locked in prolonged warfare with the Qiang, the Roman Empire on the other side of Eurasia was building its own frontier defenses. The Upper Germanic Rhaetian limes between the Rhine and the Danube stretched for about 550 kilometers, lined with forts, watchtowers, roads, and garrison posts. Rome attempted to control the movements of Germanic tribes with fixed defensive lines, while the Han built walled cities in the He corridor, Longxi, and the He Huang region, established commanderies and counties, and settled allied tribes. The two empires faced remarkably similar problems. The peoples on the other side of the frontier were not stationary. They migrated, formed alliances, splintered, and also took service inside the empire. And once an empire experienced a fiscal or political crisis, the very troops and tribes tasked with guarding the frontier could become a new threat. In the 5th century AD, the administrative and military systems of the Western Roman Empire collapsed under the combined weight of civil wars, fiscal contraction, and the steady influx of external military groups. The Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, and others established new kingdoms on former imperial territory. Meanwhile, northern China experienced prolonged division from the 4th to the 6th century, with the Xiongnu, Xianbei, Jie, Di, Qiang, and other peoples successively founding regimes. The difference is that Western Europe never again restored a unified Western Roman Empire, while China was reunified under the Sui and Tang dynasties. The Qiang are no longer just a single name in Han Dynasty histories that repeatedly launched frontier revolts. Through constant warfare and migration, those who entered the Guangzhong and Longxi regions gradually merged with the Han and other frontier populations. Those who moved south into the mountains of Sichuan blended into local ethnic groups. Those who remained in Qinghai, the upper Yellow River, and the eastern margins of the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau continued to intermix with the Tuyuhun, the Tanguts, and other highland tribes. By the 7th century AD, when the Tibetan Empire arose from the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau, its population included both the indigenous inhabitants of the highlands and the ancient Qiang, who had migrated into the region from the upper Yellow River and the northeastern plateau over the preceding millennia. The people uniformly labeled Qiang in the oracle bones of the Shang kings ultimately formed an indispensable part of the making of the Tibetan people.